All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike Dane with MLS Technology. Today we're going to be doing an introduction to RPR. I did want to give you guys a quick rundown on how our webinars function. So first and foremost, you guys are going to be starting on mute by default. Wanted to let you guys know that we do have the option to unmute you if you have a question that you would like to ask with your voice. There's just a raise hand button down at the very bottom of the screen, but preferably, please focus any of your questions to the Q&A button. The Q&A button will send a little notification to me and I can answer that question either immediately or we can leave it if there's a more appropriate time for us to give the answer to it. But either way, we also have a chat section. This is where you guys can post any stories that you want to share, comments, whatever the case may be. But just as a reminder, the Q&A will give me a notification that there's a question. The chat does not. So if there's any issues that you guys are having that you would like an answer to, please make sure that those get put into the Q&A section. Now the session will be recorded. We're going to be sending a link to the recording after class is over. I did also want to point out if you have any audio or video issues during the course to please reach out to me as quickly as possible, either the Q&A button or the chat section, primarily just because if there is any problems with you being able to connect or hear me or whatever the case may be, it's likely that you may not end up getting the CE credit that you deserve for having attended the class. So if you have any problems, please mention it as quickly as possible. Now the CE credit will be getting sent off to OREC pretty quickly after the class is over. I'll be sending all of the attendance information and then that way they can get that set up for you before the end of the month. There has been some delays recently with OREC actually assigning the credit. So we're going to try and make sure that that gets taken care of quickly. But if you guys notice any delays, it's likely not on our side, but we can always investigate just to make sure. All right. Barbara, I see your hand up. I'll be with you in just a minute. We've got the chat section and the Q&A buttons, again, down at the very bottom of your screen. Again, use the raise hand option if you would like to ask a question with your voice or get unmuted for some reason. And if you are joining us on a mobile device, you may need to tap the screen in order to see those buttons down at the bottom. They function exactly the same as the regular buttons do on the computer, but just as a little heads up, they are in a different order. But again, chat and Q&A for any typed information. And then of course, if you need to ask a question with your voice, hit that raise hand button. All right, move this out of the way. And we're going to do a poll in a moment here just to make sure everybody's here. There you go, Barbara. You should be good to go. There's a little prompt on your screen asking you to unmute if you like. Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and remove that. Okay. Well, let me get this poll out of the way. In case you guys have participated in any of our CE classes recently, we do have a little poll. This is going to be required to be answered if you would like to get the CE credit. So please make sure that you guys are answering that little poll. It's only 2 questions long, so it's fairly simple. It's really just to make sure that you're here and you're paying attention. And it looks like I need one more person to answer, and then we should be able to get started. And Gilda, I see that you're signed in on 2 devices. You only need to do it on the one. Oh, that didn't mean for you to have to sign out, but I understand. All right, it is 1:05. We're going to go ahead and officially get started in a moment here. I got another 30 seconds for you. If you have not answered on the poll, you will not be getting the CE credit. So please make sure that you answer that poll. There we go. Okay, good. Everybody's in there and we should be set. I appreciate you guys responding. We will go ahead and get started. All right. So as I mentioned, today's class is going to go over RPR. Now, in case you haven't had any experience with RPR, we are going to discuss a little bit about, oops, there it goes, what this actually serves the function of and how you guys have access to it. But just so you're aware of the acronym itself, RPR stands for Realtor Property Resource. This is a tool that was provided to you by the National Association of Realtors. What that means is that you guys will have access to this no matter what MLS you're a part of, what state you're in, as long as you're a licensed realtor and have the ability to use that title and are still paying your dues to NAR, you'll have access to RPR. So this tool that you guys have access to does have a couple different ways for you to get into it. First and foremost, when you guys get into the MLStechnology.com website, it brings you to the MLS portal. There's going to be a link here for RPR. If you're in Matrix, there's also a link here, one of the only things that's actually bold on the front screen here. It's the Realtor Property Resource link. Now, additionally, whenever you're looking at listings, so for instance, if you had any searches that you guys had run or whatever the case may be, there's always going to be a link over on the far right-hand side of the search results. And when you click on a specific listing, you're also going to see that little same icon immediately underneath the photos. So let's actually dive into just a couple different things here. So first and foremost, since this is a tool that's being provided by NAR, we want to clarify a couple of the things about this, because when it was initially introduced to the realtors, it was something that kind of spurred on some fears in people just because of what it may have represented. So we wanted to clarify, RPR is actually a wholly owned subsidiary corporation of NAR. So this is actually something that's been bought and maintained by NAR. They are not planning on trying to have this supersede any of the roles that the associations play or the MLSs play. All of this is just going to be effectively a lightning rod for any questions that your clients have. You will be able to find the answers in RPR. Now, this is a national database of parcel-centric property information. So what this means is that you guys can find properties no matter where you are in the country. If you guys start working in Alaska or in Florida, it won't matter. You'll always have access to all of the parcel data, which means every single piece of land, every single property in the entire country should have their information put in here. It's also going to augment some of the information that you guys can find through the tax record with the MLS details. Now, unfortunately, not every MLS in the country is actually participating in this. So if something is listed for sale through an MLS, it might be wise to double check to see if it actually is showing up in RPR. I'm going to show you guys where you can see the MLSs that are participating in our state. But thankfully, the two largest MLSs in the state, as well as a couple others, are still sending their data over to RPR. When you are looking at any of these details as well, it's worth pointing out that it's going to include information from even beyond the county assessor's offices and the MLSs. It will include sources of information, over 350 different sources. What that means is that we're going to have details here from, for instance, AARP has a livability index that they're providing. When we start looking at some of the neighborhood data, you're going to have census information, Bureau of Labor Statistics information. There's a huge variety of different pieces of information that you can find to just give you either an extremely generalized view of a certain area. So like we have these neighborhood overviews, as well as the property overviews that are going to be a little bit more specific to that property, those specifications, finding comparables, that kind of stuff. All of which we're going to be discussing today. Now, additionally, they do update this system often. Now, by updates, this doesn't mean the same kind of stuff that we might be experiencing with other systems where they're making changes and then how you're actually going to be working will dramatically change. They recently did an entire user interface overhaul. I believe it was either in 2020 or it may have been last year, but the overhaul to the interface is over. So at this point, there's not going to be any changes to how you use the system. There's only going to be additions to how you use the system. So a couple prime examples are actually found up here in the shortcuts. Prospects, investor analysis, opportunity zones, all of these items were actually added within the last couple of years so that you guys could find where there's a lot of properties that are maybe ripe for sale. If you have an investor that's trying to learn about a certain area, or even if you guys just want to do some farming, all of this has been built into RPR. Now, this is perfectly competent functionality as well. This isn't something that you guys might need to pay extra for on a different program or something like that. All of these function about par with the same world-class services that you guys might find and pay for outside of this system. All right. I also wanted to mention a couple things. Some of the reason why people were afraid of RPR when it was first introduced. I think it's 11 years ago now, maybe 12. But RPR does collect data from all of the MLSs. Whether the MLS is sharing that data with the rest of the world is, again, up to them. But what this means is that we are actually getting a lot of the listing data. And some people were afraid that that was going to introduce a national MLS that would actually supplant any of us that were working in that industry. That is not the case. They do not plan on becoming an MLS. They additionally don't want to have this product be something that's a consumer-facing product. Now, as we mentioned at the very beginning, this is meant to be a lightning rod for any questions that a client has. But as realtors are the only ones that have access to RPR, you're not going to have to worry about a client going and doing research on their own without actually asking questions of you. If they have a question, they can come to you. They can have that information passed on to them very quickly because you have access to RPR. There's also going to be some reports that we'll be discussing a little bit later in class that take the information that you're finding in this system and then sending that information off to the client. But it's an important distinction that they want us to clarify that unlike with Matrix, where when we see something, we send this off to a client by email, and then they have a portal where they can do further searches and do their own research on other listings or other properties. RPR is meant to have just that static report that goes out to the clients, and everything else is just information for us. So it's for your own edification that you have access to this. The last thing to mention, just like they don't have listings directly inputted into RPR, it always has to pass through an MLS. It's worth mentioning as well that they do not do any listing syndication either. So this is an endpoint for the data that's been put into the MLS. Whenever somebody puts a new listing into the system, this is where it goes, and it does not go past that. So the only information that you guys are going to be sending out is going to be when you create a report. This is a strange listing. I guess we can buy the whole street. Anyway, where did I leave off? That just kind of threw me off my groove here. So the first things that we're going to be discussing when we go through RPR beyond, just some cleanup on our information is the primary reason why we have RPR is that it's meant to allow you guys to do research on property details. Now, again, beds, baths, price, etc. That stuff kind of you can check out in Matrix. You can go into a couple other systems or even just go to some third-party website like Zillow to find the information. But when you need to find a lot further depth or maybe further details about a particular property, RPR is meant to be that source. Additionally, RPR has a fantastic mobile app. If you guys are interested in using that, they have a little tutorial that we will actually briefly, I'm hoping we'll have the time to actually watch the full tutorial. But there's a training area where you guys can find webinars in the future that they're hosting. It's not CE stuff, but it's definitely worth your time. All right. So let's actually just dive in. Up at the top right corner, we have a little profile image. In this case, I've already got a photo uploaded of myself. So I'm going to click on that little menu button to the right. It's a little arrow pointing down. I'm going to click on the profile. So before we start finding properties and researching what we need and creating reports, we want to make sure that all of our contact information is up to date and ready to go. So I've already uploaded a photo of myself and a photo of our company logo. A little further down, I've got my contact information. All of this actually should have been imported over from the MLS, so there shouldn't be anything that you need to add, or excuse me, need to change, but you may have the opportunity to add something that maybe wasn't in the MLS already. Like for instance, adding an extra phone number. Maybe if you guys are still using a pager from 1999, you can change that over to a pager. We've also got fax information, email, website information. All of those details can be clarified on here. They should, again, already have some of the basic details for you, so you shouldn't have to worry about making any changes. But if you do find that there's something on here that's incorrect, get in contact with us over at the service desk. Because if there's a problem with the data that's come over to RPR, that means that it's actually originated from the MLS, and there could be an issue there as well. Speaking of the MLS, a little bit further down, we have where you guys can get connected to any of the MLSs that you're a part of. Maybe just out of curiosity, but hit that raise hand button if you're a part of multiple MLSs. So no judgment. We don't think of this as like cheating on us or anything. It's purely business. Nobody. Okay. Well, I might just skip over this section. I'm just going to briefly mention it anyway. If you do end up becoming a part of another MLS, or if you guys join a CIE or something like that, you can add that data to the system, depending on where it's located and whether or not they're sharing their data. But you just choose your state, choose the MLS or the commercial information exchange, put in your agent information, and then add that on there. It should automatically have MLS technology connected to you, but if not, again, state, MLS, name, and then of course put in your MLS ID. Now at the very bottom of this section, this is something I mentioned earlier, but we do have a section that allows you to see what data is being shared from which association MLSs. Now in our case, we represent the largest collection of counties in the state. We are sharing not only our on-market data, but also any of our off-market data as well. So our pendings and closed, et cetera. The MLS that's in Oklahoma City, which represents another large portion of the state, is also sharing their on-market data. If I switch this filter over to all MLSs, you can see that we've actually got a couple of MLSs in the area that are not sharing their listing data. This isn't necessarily a bad thing for them, but it might mean that they're not going to be able to get as much out of the RPR app as they might want. For instance, the Northeast Oklahoma Board of Realtors, which is in the Grand Lake area, sometimes people are just choosing not to share because that's an easy way to kind of edge out competition. But if you do end up needing to find out about these particular areas, you may need to reach out to a contact there, unlike everybody else that's sharing. All right. We also have the option to add in your license number. If you do end up representing in multiple states, you can get that information added in there. And the last thing on here is the assistant users. It's worth pointing out one more time that this is not meant to be a consumer front-end product, which means that if you do have a client that is really interested in things and they keep on asking you questions, this assistant users is not meant for that purpose. Primarily because often the information that's actually been added to the listing data is meant only for members' eyes or only for realtors' eyes. The broker remarks being put in there, the compensation values, things like that are not meant to be seen by the public. And subsequently, if you provide the assistant user access to the RPR system, they're going to be seeing a lot of things that are not meant to be seen by people that are not licensed realtors. So if you do have an assistant of some kind, you can give them access to RPR. It does make it really handy because then whenever you send off any of the reports, you're sending it off as the agent that has given permission. So if you have a client that needed something pulled up real quick, you guys are on the road or you're literally on the road and you don't want to actually, pull up the app while you're driving, you can always get in contact with your assistant and have them send off the report to whoever it is that you're needing to. All right, let's scroll back up to the top here. We've got some basic account information, a place for you guys to change your password, make sure your time zone is set properly. And we do have a section here for the RPR mobile access. It does show you in real time what the, sorry. Oh, sorry, I thought somebody was trying to get into my office. But it does show you in real time what mobile devices you have access to RPR on. You can put this on tablets and phones, iPads, iPhones, Android phones and tablets. It won't matter. It is extremely useful when you guys are out on the road and you need to access maybe a property that you're on a showing tour and a client looks across the street and sees a sign in the yard and says, I want to know more about that house. You can pull it up on your phone and immediately send them a 30-page report that tells them anything and everything they could ever need to know about it. So strongly recommend that you guys check out the RPR app. This will be included on the email whenever we send that out for the recording, excuse me. All right. So again, make sure that your profile is all up to date, hit that save option, and now let's head over to settings. Now you can immediately get over to settings just by clicking on the little drop down up at the top here and going to settings. But either way you get there, the settings were designed to help you guys kind of narrow your focus whenever you're looking at maps and searches. So it'll label things that are new based on the time frame that you've set over here. So for instance, if we are working in an area where there's new properties popping up just left and right, every day there's a bunch of new properties. If I have this set to the maximum of 30 days, well, most my entire map is just going to be flooded with a bunch of things saying new. If I set this down to the lowest, 1 day, and I'm maybe not signed in for a couple of days, I might miss out on a bunch of new properties just because I didn't see them labeled as such. So try to set this appropriately towards the area that you're in so that you guys are getting the most out of whatever you're searching for things, or whenever you're looking at the map, you can see what things are actually new. Similarly, set recently sold or leased to a certain time frame as well. Again, this is going to define what's going to be appearing on the map so that if you do end up wanting to kind of thin the herd of all of the listings that have sold recently, you can crank that down just a little bit. I would strongly recommend messing with these whenever you guys get in. Again, just like we did with the profile, make sure that everything is set the way that you want and then hit save. But before we leave this spot, I wanted to point out the My Markets section over here on the side. For those of you guys who have spent a lot of time in Matrix, you may recognize the My Markets section kind of has similar terminology and usage as the Market Watch and Hot Sheets section. So on Matrix, we can keep track of what's going on in a specific area. We can even set this to be specific region or specific property type, specific date range. On RPR, they have the My Markets section, which is going to effectively function the same way that the hot sheets do, except instead of it just being kind of some static information like we see with Matrix, it's giving us the option to see these on this My Markets widget that appears on our home page. So when we first landed on RPR, we had quick and easy access to seeing, let's say I wanted to find out what's happening in McAllister. So I zoom in here, I can see all of the properties. Move this down, there we go. I can see all the properties that are currently for sale and switch over to the ones that are currently for lease, any price changes that have occurred, whether or not something has gone pending recently. Again, our MLS is sharing this. Unfortunately, no one else in the state is for some reason. We've got those that are closed. And again, this is going to be defined by whether or not we had seen the, or changed the recently sold. So if you guys wanted to maybe give a little bit more definition to this map, add some more items that may have sold a little bit longer ago than the 14 days that I left it with, you can always increase that or decrease that depending on what you need. So in my case, I'm pretty happy with how this looks. I can switch over to a different one. So for instance, if I switch over to Tulsa, I can see anything and everything that's sold in the last 14 days. Again, switching back over to for sale. And of course, this new or coming soon thing is kind of flooding my map. So if I wanted to, I can go back to my settings. I can turn this down to just the 1 day. There we go. And now it's going to be a little bit better. It's still not ideal, but again, if it's a really high volume market like we have here in Tulsa, you're going to notice that there's a lot of new tags on things. All right. Now, a little further down on our homepage, a little further down on our homepage, we have a section here for My Listings. I don't have any legitimate listings, which means that I don't have anything showing up on here. But we do have sections over here to the right where we've got the My Properties. While we go through taking a look at some of the properties, we're going to be presented with a little button up at the top right that allows us to save that particular property so that I can go back to it later. This works similarly to the carts that we have in Matrix, except instead of it being something where you can make a separate cart and add a bunch of listings to that are separate from a different cart that have a bunch of different listings, this is kind of just a repository. This is a great way to kind of keep track of maybe a specific property that you guys are going to be working with in the future, like if you have a potential seller. But more often than not, you may end up having a buyer that tells you, hey, I really like that property. You can save that just in case it might help you guys find what's going to be the best property for them in the future, if that's not it. Recent is actually going to show us any of the properties that we've seen recently. One of the cool things about this is that if you check something out on a mobile device, it'll show that over here on the left. So for instance, I can even see it looks like there was a search on the phone, search on the or recent properties that I saw on the phone, and then a bunch of the properties that I saw while I was looking at the things on the computer. So this is a little bit more nuanced than what we have in Matrix. Matrix has the option to see any of the recent searches that we've done to a limited extent, but it doesn't keep track of which particular listings you've looked at. So if you, again, you have that client that you guys are out on a showing tour and they point across the street at something, you click on that, load the report, and then you come back to the office later and you're like, oh shoot, what was the property that I was just looking at? Instead of having to go back and see which reports you had created, you can just click on this recent properties button and then see any of the properties that you had recently clicked on. If you visit it again, it'll readjust it so that you guys still have that available in the future. Additionally, on the home page, there's a quick button here for reports and notes. We're going to see what those are in a bit here, so I'm going to just leave those for a little bit later. And then we also have a section over here to the far right that has the saved searches, any saved searches that we've created, and any of the recent searches that we've done, regardless of whether or not we actually loaded a particular property or not. All right. So now that we've discussed a little bit about the home page, at least got a little bit of a preview of it, let's now move up to the top here where we have our search function. Now the search function actually has a couple different ways for us to do this. We've got the residential commercial toggle, so we can switch between those. And you notice whenever we switch between those, it just changes which of the drop downs are available. We've got building, lot. We switch over to residential, we've got beds and baths. Now, if we wanted to narrow this down to a specific area, we can either put in a specific address, or if we wanted to just kind of get a picture of a specific area, we can just type in the area. Now, if you have a zip code, you guys can load those up by just typing in the zip code for it, or you can type in the name of the city that you're interested in. And it'll offer you in this drop down here what area it is that you're interested in searching for. So if you needed to just find this one right here, you click on it and it'll immediately dive into the search itself. So what I would recommend doing is that if you do find yourself wanting to search for an area, make sure that all of your drop downs over here to the right are in place first. So I'm going to make sure that I have the for sale or for lease. I only want to see the things that are active or active under contract, so that it's contingent as far as our system is concerned. I'm going to make sure that I have this set up with single family. I don't need any of these other options checked at the moment. We've got a couple different ways to search for the price. Again, right now, since we have both lease and sale checked, when I get to the price, it has a lease price down here. I'm going to uncheck for lease. and that way it blocks that section out. So now when I put in a price, I can either search for the total value, the lot size versus the value of the property, the living space versus this value, or the acreage versus the value. Now, in our case, I'm just going to keep things simple and just search for the total value. And on the price, it does give us a couple quick clicks so that if I wanted to just go 200,000 to 300,000, easy peasy. Or if we wanted to get a little bit more nuanced, unlike some of the other systems that have drop downs that are kind of limiting you on where you want to, or what exact price you want to search for, I can actually put in something that's a little bit smaller. And we'll do 275. There we go. So now I've got a $50,000 range, but it's not going to have to conform to the 50s or whole numbers. So we can keep that a little bit more focused and targeted. Bedrooms, bathroom counts, similarly, will have a min and max. One of the things that I really like about this is that if you do end up just wanting to do 3 or more, you just hit that 3, put that into the minimum, and you can leave the maximum empty. Similarly, the bathroom count does the exact same thing, min, max, and you're good to go. And we can also expand out further options by just clicking on this filters button. Now, interestingly enough, we see some repetition here. Here's our type and status again. Here's our property type. Here's our price one more time, and our bedroom and bathroom. But now we also have a price to estimated value percentage option that's been added. We can even check for the living size. So if we have a specific square footage that the client is interested in, you can add that. You can also add in the lot size and switch between acres or square feet. We have a whole section here that's just going to be about the foreclosure status. In my case, maybe I just want to exclude all of those, but you also have the choice to add in any of the pre-foreclosure, like list pendants, short sales, etc., foreclosures, or anything that's already been foreclosed upon. So we've got the distressed date range as well, if you guys needed that. You can check for open houses, as long as the open house has actually been added to the MLS that it was entered into. And then down here at the very bottom, we've got owner name, year built, time owned. But most importantly, at the very bottom is where we have our keyword search. Now, the keyword search is where we finally have some of the options that are kind of overlooked otherwise. If you have a property that you're trying to find that has a specific part or piece, as long as it's mentioned either in the broker remarks or public remarks, or if it's something that came in with the listing data, you guys can search for that. So notice we have simple things like a 2-car garage, or whether it's in a cul-de-sac, but you can also add other things like mature trees. So if that was mentioned in the remarks, either the public or broker remarks, you'll be able to find that listing. All right, so up here at the top, you'll see that without having entered any location that I'm going to be searching for, it's not showing me any results. As soon as I start typing in something up here, so like let's say we're going to do, how about Eufaula again? We clicked on the drop down where it had Eufaula, and it immediately started running our search again with all of the same filters that we just set up. Now, when we go into this filter section, if we needed to make further changes after we've clarified our area or added some extra details to this, we can actually see a live count. So for instance, if I switch this over to all of these options, there we go, I can see I've added in an additional listing. If I start removing those though, again, it's going to show us a live count of how many properties are still there. So I'm going to do update search. Excellent. So we've got a few listings that have popped up. Let's now take a look at how our search results are going to be displayed. So whether you guys searched for a location and then went in and added in your criteria, or whether you added your criteria first and then chose your location, no matter which way you guys get to the search results, the page is always going to start you off with this list view. Now the list view includes most of the information that you might need about the property. But let's say that you guys want to see those photos a little bit larger. Instead of having to click on the photo or click on the address to open up the listings property details, there's also going to be the option to switch over to a photo view. So when we're looking at this list view, up at the top right, immediately underneath where we have our filters, is where we can find a photo grid view. Now the photo grid view just makes it so that it's a little bit larger image, but whenever I hold my cursor over any of these images, you notice these little arrows pop up as well. Those arrows are going to allow us to move between each of the different photos. And then if we end up finding a property that might be of interest to a client, we can click on that little heart icon. In this case, I'm actually going to save this one because I think I've seen that in a dream. That's weird. Anyway, when you save it, you can give it a name. So for instance, if you guys had a client that you were working with, we'll do Johnson's Dream Home. Perfect. I save that. What's going to end up happening is that I can go back to any of my favorited listings by coming up here and then checking the My Saved Properties. Again, we also have quick access to that on the home page. And if we find that this particular search that we've run with all of the different filters and everything else that we've added to this is something that we want to keep, similar to the way that we can save the listings, we also have a save button up at the top right here for the actual search itself. When we hit that, you fall between, oops. Perfect, save. All right, so now I've got not only saved properties, but also a new saved search as well. And again, all of that can be circled back to on our home page. There was that section that had both of those. Now, if we end up liking the way that this looks, but we also kind of wanted to see where each of these was located, because clearly these can be all over the place since we got a big lake that kind of splits everything up. We also have the map view. So again, our default view was this list view. We switched it over to our photo view where we can see things and save the favorites, just like we could save the favorites over here. When we get to the map though, things are going to get a little bit more complicated. Now, if I see something that I like, I actually have to click on the dot for it. Then I can see the photo of it. I can also scroll between the photos if I needed to see the details about this house. And then there's also a save icon up at the top here so that we can save that as well. Now, since it's got a lot going on the screen, it's not asking us for a name for that, but you can, again, go back to it if you need to under the My Saved Properties. Now, one more thing to mention, whenever you guys are needing to look at the property, when we're looking at the list view, it works almost identically to the way that Matrix does. If you click on the listing details, either by clicking on the photo or clicking on the address, it'll pull you into the property summary. The photo grid view effectively works the exact same way. If you click anywhere in the center of the photo or on the address, it'll load into the listing. But when you get over here to the map view, you actually have to select the item and then you can go to this view full details. So we're going to skip out on that for just a moment and let's talk a little further about the search functions. Now, if you guys are fond of doing the map search functions instead of having to rely on maybe a specific location, because in this case, we searched for Eufaula and ended up finding a bunch of properties that are not in Eufaula proper. We may end up wanting to draw on the map to see if we can find something. And there's a couple different ways for us to do that. Now, if we initially ran our search with a location like we had here, we can go back and actually draw a shape using this draw option. But there's also an easy way to get into a map search. Right up here at the top, there's this research button. This allows us to do a property search the same way that we saw here. And similarly to how we have Matrix, where there's always access to this search function up here at the top, RPR is going to work the exact same way. You click on research, we've got a property search, a map search, neighborhood search, school search, and so on. In my case, I'm going to click on this map search. It's going to start me back here. I've got some of my filtering options already put in place. If I needed to go back and make sure that this was maybe a different price range, go, 1500, and I'm going to just leave that empty there. I'm going to see 3 plus, 2 plus. Yeah, I think that should be fine. I'm going to zoom out, and I need to get a little bit of a lay of the land. So I'm going to actually set this over to our full screen view. There's a little icon here where it has the 4 corners. When I click on that, it puts me into a full screen view. I can hit escape on my keyboard to actually bring me back out of the full screen view. But this makes it a lot easier to kind of navigate around and see what I'm looking at. Now there's also a view option where you can switch between the satellite imagery. Notice this actually just got rid of all of the labels that we had on here. So if I start zooming in, it's not going to apply the labels back, even if I am zoomed in really closely. If I go back to my view and switch this to the aerial view, on the other hand, it's going to leave all the satellite imagery on there, but instead now it's actually got the labels. So the labels are going to allow us to see where we are in case that's actually a part of why you wanted to search in this area. Oh, actually, hey, would you look at that? Here's our building. All right. So I'm going to go back to our view. The one that I recommend that you guys use is actually the road option. Now, the road option is going to put it into effectively kind of a low data, high detail view. This way you guys can actually see where everything is. If I start zooming in on a specific spot, I can even see where the parcel lines are. Now, all of this is going to be relatively familiar to you guys if you've used the map search in either Matrix or Realist. Both of them effectively function the exact same way. Now, speaking of functioning the exact same way, we also have a draw option. Now, the draw option is going to allow us to add in either a freehand shape. So for instance, if I wanted to try and get this particular area here, I can draw around it and see what's in there by hitting the search in this area option. Now, of course, there's nothing in this particular spot. Oh no. So I'm going to click on the shape. We can label this area. We can run the search in this area. We can even save it for future use. So if you guys wanted to maybe establish a certain spot in town that you needed to use for future reference, you guys can draw that shape out and be done with it. In my case, I'm actually just going to get rid of that. Remove boundary. There we go. So I'm going to click on draw. Let's do the radius tool instead. So I'm going to move my map just a little bit, and let's take a look around this park here. Zoom back out, hit draw, radius, and just like we do in Matrix or Realist, click and drag, and you guys will get the shape out of it. I'm going to do 1.5 miles away from this park. Should be a decent distance for us to be able to walk. And when I hit the search in this area, it's going to limit me down to just the properties that match, again, those same specifications that I had already defined in just this area. Again, just like how Matrix functions. If you do end up wanting to add in a rectangle, it works the exact same way that the radius option does. You draw the shape, hit the search in this area, and you're good to go. Now, the last option is going to be the polygon tool. I had somebody that was trying to understand this the other day because it's the exact same function that we saw when we're in Matrix and Realist, but they described it as the conspiracy theory boards. I don't know if you guys have seen those in movies and TV shows where they have like a pin board where they have photos put up and the strings that are connecting all of the criminals to each other or whatever the case may be. But this freehand polygon tool effectively works like that, where I'm going to be putting a pin. I'm not dragging. Right now, all I'm doing is just moving my cursor, and you notice how there's this faint line that's following behind it. So effectively, when I click again, I've dropped another pin. It's now made that line before a solid color. And now when I'm moving my cursor around, it's following from that same pin that I just dropped. So think of each click as a pin, another pin, another pin. And you can make some pretty wild shapes with this, but it's also going to be a lot tidier than having to go through and do the freehand option. So if you guys are a little bit more nitpicky like I am with how the shapes are drawn, that freehand polygon tool is really handy. So I'm going to hit search in this area. There we go. So now I've got this specific shape that I've drawn in. And if I needed to jump back and actually see any of my search results in the list view or the photo grid view, I can still go back and make those view changes up at the top here, but it's still going to be obliging the shape that I've drawn onto my map. We also have a couple other tools that I'm going to just kind of jump through real quick. These don't get a lot of traction, but just for you guys, for your information, we have a driving option, which allows us to check travel time, distances, and traffic counts, especially if you guys are working in a relatively high traffic area. Like for instance, my wife was wanting to get a house in Midtown or a place in Midtown. And when we were looking for places, one of the most important things is that she needed to know how much traffic was going to be going around. So for instance, when we were looking in this area down here, we can turn on the traffic counts option. I'm going to select all, and we can see what areas are going to be really noisy, just based on the amount of traffic nearby. This also could define congestion in case you guys are wanting to go places really quickly. Like my wife works at the Philbrook Museum, so traveling down this road is going to be kind of cumbersome during specific times of day. So we can define that based on this driving tool. We can do travel time, where we need to put in maybe an address, like if I worked at ORU, for instance. There we go. How long is it going to take me if I travel by car and I need to travel at 7 a.m. to get wherever I'm going on a Monday? How far can I get in 15 minutes? And what that does is effectively floods the map with how far you can travel based on the roads that are available. Also, it takes into account the traffic counts, the times of day, et cetera, et cetera. So this can be really handy for people actually like me, who just hate commuting. I mean, I used to work in Bartlesville and I lived in Tulsa, and it was a 45-minute drive every day, and I hated it. There's only so many podcasts and audiobooks you can listen to before it kind of gets a little, or at least for me. I know other people are built different, but that can make a huge difference. But if you guys have a location that, like for instance, I would put in our work location, and then I want to make sure that I'm not, any more than 20 minutes away from my job, even on the worst traffic days, I can put that in there and see what properties are nearby. So it's a really handy tool. Additionally, there's also a points of interest option. This is a great way to find out what's available in the near vicinity. A friend of mine who's a little bit up there in age, one of the first things that he wanted to know is how close a hospital was to him. So whenever we were searching for things, we had to make sure that that was checked. And that way we can find out, all right, well, it looks like there's a couple medical professions nearby. It's not what we're looking for. How about this one right here? St. John's. Oh, that's going to be important. So now we might want to set up an area around that to make sure that we're only going to be searching within a mile of that particular property or that particular hospital. So a lot of different ways to kind of use the tools that are available to curate a selection for the clients that you guys are working with. There is another option to add in any of the schools. They have information for public, private, and charter schools, elementary, middle, and high schools. Whenever you check that, you guys can see what the schools are that are nearby. If you guys don't want to include any private or charter schools, again, you just uncheck those and it'll still add it to the map. And notice this is adding it even if it's not within the area that I actually was searching within. Now, the last thing on here is the data layers. I'm going to remove all these boundaries. We can clear that out. I'm going to take away all of our schools and points of interest. Excellent. Let's now switch over to the data layers option. Now, the most important one that everybody always wants to know where it's found is on data layers. You can find the flood zones. One of the important things to recognize with this particular view is that when you're looking for this, it's not going to show the same level of detail that we would find in Matrix or Realist. What we're seeing when we're actually going through and adding this flood zone on here is just a risk assessment. So it's not going to be giving you guys the X500 floodway or X500 floodplain or X100 floodway floodplain, whatever the case may be. It's just going to show you guys the risk level or relative risk level, I should say. If you guys are interested in learning more about the flood zones, There is a separate tab for that whenever you're looking at listings in Matrix. It also shows the tax assessor information or the county assessor's information. So whatever the actual assignment according to FEMA is can be found up at the top here. But this is still going to be handy if you guys have clients that are concerned about the flood zones, because you can provide this information and show them, yeah, the properties that are over here on 15th and Denver are perfectly safe, for instance. All right. So that's it for our map. I would suggest exploring some of these other options that you guys have on here, playing around with this at your leisure. It's a really solid system. You're not going to break it if you guys are playing with it. So feel free to dive in and just check it out. So I'm going to actually draw a specific area on my map here so we can have some properties to work with. And again, I'm just going to be doing search in this area. All right, let me head back to my photo grid view and see what properties are available. How about we switch this from that to, let's do a maximum of 200,000. Not likely since we've already got an area that's pretty, yeah, let's try 300. Man, I drew my square in the wrong spot. All right, let's grab this listing then. So now let's dive into what the individual listings will look like. So I click on this particular listing, again, either on the photo or the address, and it'll pull up the details about the property. It's going to start us off with an interface that has a bunch of tabs up at the top. So again, similar to the way that we have in Matrix, where there's listing, data, tax, so on and so forth, except in RPR, what we're going to be seeing is the summary that's going to be entirely focused on the property's details. Then we have the history, which shows the property's price increases and decreases, charts that show its relative price and value in the area that it's in. We've also got an option to do refined value, which we'll discuss in depth a little bit later, as well as the CMAs, which will actually run a practical version of that after our break at the top of the hour. And then finally, there's also a neighborhood button. We'll be discussing that briefly before we go to our break. But on this summary page, you can see a few different options on here. We actually lucked out. This particular listing has not only photos that had been uploaded to it, we can also see a street view. So if we wanted to see what it actually looks like, in this case, it looks like the street view is pre-remodeling, because it looks like there's a pretty dramatic difference between when this particular photo was taken and when this one was taken. Even the car got upgraded, apparently. We've also got an overhead view, so we can see maybe where the property's parcel lines might be, or like where the what's nearby. There's also a virtual tour that they uploaded to the listing data. This is going to leave the RPR website, so if you guys are wanting to see those, it's going to bring you to the same virtual tour that you guys would be able to find in Matrix. Just keep in mind that whenever that's actually been uploaded, oh yeah, I thought that was giving a different MLS number. This is the MLS number. But whenever that actually pulls up, it is going to be outside of RPR. It's not going to try and load it within RPR. And you can also see historical photos for previous listings. You can change which listing you're looking at by clicking on that. So this is what it looked like when it was last purchased, and then they did a lot of upgrades to it. You can scroll through the photos using these little icons down here. If you do end up wanting to skip to the beginning or end, you've got buttons for that. And you can even put it into a full screen mode where it shows you guys the larger versions of the photos, and it turns on a slideshow automatically. You can turn that off and even just see all of the thumbnails and zoom in on those at your leisure. Close out of that. A little further down, we have the property summary. Now, I wanted to point something out because this is going to be a little bit of a point of contention for some people when they first get into this. The list price will be shown for any of the listings that are active, pending, closed, whatever. Interestingly enough, we also have a second dollar value here. This is referred to as the RVM. Now, the RVM is actually just like the AVM that you guys have heard in different programs, an automated valuation model. Now, in our case, the RVM that's found in RPR is actually the realtor valuation model. And since they're actually using the term realtor, you guys notice that this is a registered trademark. This is the proprietary algorithm that NAR has come up with in order to value properties. So it's a little bit more reliable. Actually, a little bit is an understatement. It's a lot more reliable than some of the other products that you guys might find with AVMs. Most notably, a lot of people recognize an AVM called Zestimate. Not particularly fond of those things, but obviously they, get some traction with the clients themselves. But if you guys would like to give a little bit better approximation of what the property's value is, the RVM is usually going to be a reliable source. Now it does give us the flat value right here, but it's also showing us more on RVM down here at the bottom where it shows a range, in this case, a relatively narrow range. And then we also have a pretty high confidence in the number that it produced. Now, the confidence score here is actually going to change based on how much data is available. The same thing is true of the RVM. The RVM is only going to be produced if there is a lot of data that's available from the MLS as well as the public records. The typical AVM that you guys will find in other products is actually going to be something based on just the property details that are found in the public records. The RVM, thankfully, has access to much greater amounts of data as well as much greater depth of data. So they're able to produce a significantly more accurate score and give it a relatively high confidence. So effectively, what you might be seeing is that if you're looking in an area that's really rural or doesn't have a lot of market activity, you may not be able to find an RVM. There may still be an AVM that's produced if there's still at least some properties that are moving in the vicinity, whether it was in the MLS or not. But if there isn't much moving around it or nothing that's really comparable in the vicinity, you may not even see that there's an estimate that's been provided at all. Now, in our case, it looks like the estimate actually was just a little bit off from what the listing price actually is. That is part of the reason why on the confidence score, it gives itself a little 10% likelihood that it's not going to sell for that value. And that 10% increases as the score goes down. You'll also notice if it doesn't have a lot of information, the estimated value range is also going to dramatically increase. Like we found one yesterday that was a $1 million listing, and the value that it had on here was actually like 750 to like 850 or something like that, but the confidence score was a 4, and it was a relatively small range, or a relatively large range for that value. Now, the description is going to be coming over from the public remarks. Then we have the details about this particular property coming over both from the public records as well as the listing data. You're going to notice as well that a lot of these sections down here have places where you can add information. This is not meant to actually make changes to the listing details or even just make changes to the public record information. This is just information for yourself. So we're going to talk about this a little bit later in class, but in my case, looking at an active listing, if I was working with a property that was actually not on the market currently, and I wanted to, start getting some of the details from the seller, I can use RPR to actually track all of that information down in advance so that by the time I start filling out my property data form for Matrix, I've already got some of that information written somewhere, and I can just go back in, grab my notes, and start filling out my details. Now, there's also a section over here on the right where we can add in any notes or photos. This is a repository that's also available whenever you're using your mobile app. So if I pulled this particular property up on my app on my phone, not only will I be able to add the notes, which will appear here, but I can also take photos of the property while I'm there. I have known a couple agents who legitimately use RPR as kind of their starting point. We even had somebody that was taking a photo of the property from their driver's side window, and you could see the passenger side door frame in the top of the photo. I mean, they cropped it later, but they uploaded those onto RPR, got back to their computer, re-downloaded them, and uploaded them onto the listing data. So you can use this as kind of a one-stop shop if you're needing to keep track of information. There's also sections down here for notes, You can see what schools have been added, either from the perspective of the listing or from the proximity. Again, just take these with a grain of salt. If you guys end up seeing a location-based school, that might not be where the student's actually going to end up going. It's just based on the location itself. So always double check with the agent or always double check with the school district if you guys need that. We've got a price change history. This keeps track of any of the price changes for that listing. We've got the AARP livability index, which we mentioned earlier. This one's kind of in the middle of the road. It shows a lot of the details over here on the side. Not ideal. I bet you money this one's because there's a processing plant across the river. Every once in a while, that smell just really gets you. Interior features, exterior features. We've got location details, including the legal description down here at the bottom, tax information. You can see this on a year-by-year basis if we go to the history tab, deed records. That's about it. Now, over on the right-hand side, there was a map. The map allows us to see an interactive view of this. So if we wanted to do any of those overlays or the travel time or anything else that we saw when we were discussing the map search earlier, we can do the exact same thing. But this time, I'm going to do my travel time. I'm going to pick up from there. And I'm going to see how far I can get on a Monday at 8 a.m. within 15 minutes. Pretty decent distance. So let's go ahead and actually put a pin in it. We've got some other details on here that we can look at a little bit later, but I want to give you guys a break from having to hear me talk at you for a while. So let's do a 10-minute break. It's almost 2:02. So I will see you guys back here in 10 minutes. If you guys see the video go away, we're going to be starting back up again. I will need you guys to be back. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand so that I know that you're returned. But again, I'll see you guys in 10 minutes. All right. We're going to go ahead and get started again. Welcome back, everybody. If you wouldn't mind, hit that raise hand button just to let me know that you guys are back. I did want to thank you guys for participating today, and I'm glad that OREC has actually given us the ability to do this without requiring you guys to share your videos. So this helps us, and I think it helps a lot of people to not have to feel like you have to get dressed up just to get on a webinar. You know, sometimes it's nice to do it in your pajamas if you want to, but in order to be able to keep doing that, we need to make sure that everybody's participating and participating in the polls and so on. But see, almost everybody's hand is up. Andrea, if you can hear me, we're getting started again. If you wouldn't mind hitting that raise hand option, I just want to make sure that everybody's back. Excellent. Okay, cool. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. I don't want to have to stare at everybody the entire webinar anyway. Sometimes you just want to focus on what we're teaching, right? You know? Anyway. All right, so we were talking before we went to break about our search that we had run, and then we went to take a look at a particular property. We were checking out the details for that, but just to circle back to how we actually got here, we were on our homepage. We ran a search either by doing our property search that's built into the top of the homepage, or by running the map search, which we did after that. You can also find any of the listings in this market watch, the My Markets section. We can see what's for sale and so on. A little further down, we had the saved properties. You can see that Johnson's Dream home that we saved earlier. We can see the Eufaula search that we created, as well as any of the recent searches that we had done, whether it was saved or not. We're going to jump back into a property that we were just looking at. So I'm going to go to this recent option, and I got separated or somebody called and I had to go up to the front desk, and now I'm back at my computer. Cool, I can jump right back into that same property that I was just looking at. Now, we took a look at the property summary, going over how we have the AVM or RVM if there's enough information, the confidence score, the details about it, any of the changes that we needed to make to the details, either from the public facts or the listing facts, we can add on there, adding in any of the listing notes. But now let's actually switch over to a different tab. So when I click over to this history tab, you'll notice that I still have my save button. So in case this is still a property that I wanted to save, I can always hit that little heart icon up at the top there. But when we move to the history tab, we're going to see a lot of information that's related to not only this particular property where we have the AVM or RVM. Looks like there was a dramatic jump in the value, and then another dramatic jump in the value again here. It looks like after some pretty dramatic renovations that they made. As we scroll down here, we can also see any of the previous sales transactions. So the last time it was sold, we can switch between those if there was multiple instances using this little button down here at the bottom. All of these are coming directly from the public references. So this is the county assessor's information that's been provided. A little further down, we have our tax information. We can go back year by year, again, using the same buttons that would appear if there were more results upon this last one. Or we can go all the way to the very first year that we have information for this back in 2004. A little further down, we have our mortgage records. Again, if there were multiple mortgage records, it would have this little button down here at the bottom to allow us to scroll between those. Now, something that was present on the summary and is still present here on the history is these little charts over here to the right. And we can see this is broken down by the zip code, county, and then the state. If we do end up in a situation where we're searching for something in a area that's only got one zip code, like if I did this in Tahlequah or I think McAllister or Muskogee does as well. I know Ada as well, where they have just one zip code and maybe a postal zip code that doesn't really have any properties on it. It'll switch this out from being the specific zip code to being the city, that you get a little bit better definition of what the property's value is relatively. There's also going to be the historical records for the property. Again, this is also on the home page, the summary page, but you guys can go back through each of the different listings to find out more details about it. Next, we've got our charts. I like that they have this arranged in a way that's going to be like the things that you guys use the most, and then maybe occasionally we'll use, and then the charts I think don't really get too much interaction, but this does still have some relatively good information. We can see that this particular property might not have actually met some of the averages that we had here until very recently. So this kind of fell back in line with the zip code that we're in, the county, and the state. We can switch between these 1, 2, 3, and all years. Others will only have maybe a 1 year or 2 year option, or 1, 2, or 3 year. Oh, here's 1, 2 year. Listing inventory in the area. So this is just showing us what's happening in that particular zip code, median sales, so on and so forth. So not particularly a lot of information that your clients might be interested in, but you may need to know this, or if you're talking with an investor, they may be interested in this. Speaking of talking to investors about things, if you guys ever need to give kind of an overview of a particular area, you can always click over to this neighborhood button. We'll come back to the refined value and the CMAs in a moment, but when we switch over to the neighborhood option, what this is doing is our breadcrumb trail up here at the top where we see we were on the home page, we ran a property search, we ended up getting this particular listing. Now we're actually looking at the zip code information for this as a neighborhood perspective. So our summary has now actually switched over from being the property summary to this particular zip code summary. We see the median estimated value, what the price changes are. We can keep track of all of that, even hold our cursor over any of these lines to find out, all right, looks like March 2020, the average value was 186, or median value was 186. And now it looks like in December of 2021, actually increased quite a bit, almost $40,000. So we can see a lot of information on here. Again, this is going to be exclusively from the perspective of the zip code. We've got some basic details about the population down here. We can see more information about the housing under the housing tab. This one takes a while to load. Again, this is giving us general information about that zip code and its median estimated home value. So the actual houses instead of just the summary, how many rent versus own, list price versus listing volume. There's a whole bunch of different options on here. The people one is the one that I'm usually interested in. I always like doing demographic studies, even when I was in college. I was a graphic design major, and one of my marketing classes was all about demographic breakdowns and who's interested in what, so on and so forth. This might be really important information for investors, or again, if you guys have a buyer that might just want to learn about the area from the perspective of, who's there, this could actually be really important information. Education level, population of children by age, population of adults by age, households with or without children, income brackets, occupational categories. Whoa, a lot of people in education in that area. It's interesting. The economy is another spot that's going to show us whether or not people are employed or not, what the median salaries are. Slowly but surely it'll load. Come on, friend. There we go. So when we're looking at this, we've got our income, we've got our unemployment rate, thankfully been dropping. It's been a pretty wild ride since the pandemic started. Something that we haven't been pointing out as we've gone through this, there's going to be some of these pieces of information that'll have a little tag up at the top that says about this data. So for instance, where are we actually getting this information from? We can switch over to about this data. And it's actually coming over from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it's being updated on a monthly basis. So if we wanted to go back and see as much information as we could, hey, look at that, a pandemic started. And it's finally getting people back into the jobs. So I'm going to switch over now to the quality of life option. This is another one that I find actually really interesting because this is going to show what it's like to live there. We've got what its elevation is, what its annual rainfall is, annual snowfall, days of full sunlight, which, by the way, where I grew up in Colorado was like 208. And everybody always tells me that Colorado is so snowy and cold. And I'm like, not in Littleton. It's the mountains that you're thinking of. We got average commute time, how people are getting to work, and so on. So now, once we're done kind of investigating the neighborhood, we can always switch back to the property by using the property button, or again, we can use this breadcrumb trail to jump back to wherever we were in the past, whether I needed to look at a different listing or different property, or even just go back to the property that I was originally looking at when I clicked the neighborhood button. All right. Now, when we first landed on this page, one of the things that I mentioned was our RVM, how it had a price that was separate from the estimate. There's a couple different ways for us to interact with the estimates. First and foremost, if there is an estimate, we have an option to do the refined value. Now, in my case, I've got refined value button right here, and there's also a refined value tab up at the top. Both of those will lead to the same location, where we're going to have to clarify the facts one more time. So in this case, it looks like it's grabbing the information over from the county assessor's office. So I don't have the correct number of bedrooms. If I needed to make that change, I can also do that change on this page here. So if I needed to put 3 bedrooms, save. Now when I go back to my refined value, now it's going to have that 3 bedrooms that I marked on there. If there were any other differences that we needed to update, so like for instance, if I knew that this was actually a larger size now, they added in an extra bathroom, those kinds of changes that we're making, when we hit apply, it's going to increase the value of the property based on those new specifications that you've clarified for it. So if I went back to the default and then only added in the additional bathroom, 3 bedroom, 2 bathroom, we can see that in this area, wait, was there 2 bathrooms already and I just decreased it? No, I'll be honest, I don't think I've ever actually caused it to decrease the value based on information I put in here. Well, let's see. There we go. That's what I'm used to seeing. If we do end up making any changes, it'll increase or decrease the value based on whatever it is that you've added. So if I reset this back and say that I put in 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, there we go. Should give an increase. I'm not sure why it keeps on going back to this decrease. Oh, I'll research that later. We also have a refined value option. The refined value option is actually going to be where you can put in any improvements that they've made to the property. It's important to recognize that when we add in any of these improvements, so like let's say that their hobby back in 2020 in the middle of the pandemic was, or the beginning of the pandemic, I should say, was doing a major kitchen remodel before all the lumber prices went up. If they did end up investing some serious money in this, whenever I click on add, it's going to note that in there, but it's also going to depreciate the value that they invested in this according to how long ago it was and what the kind of remodel it was that they did, whether it was mid-range or upper range or whatever the case may be. So they can't expect that they're going to end up getting the exact value out. And of course, it's also going to try and account for market conditions, whether we make changes to the bedroom count, bathroom count, square footage. All of this is going to be based on the comparable properties in the vicinity so that we know for a fact that this is not going to be something that's just, you know, increasing it based on some kind of national average for what the bedrooms are supposed to be. The refined value on the other side, instead of the home improvements, the needed improvements are going to be things that are going to typically be things that decrease the value just outright. So in my case, if I ended up having this conversation with the client about, look, the fence needs to be repaired or the chimney needs to be swept, or whatever the case may be. If there is something that has to be done and you've tried to reiterate to the seller, like this is going to be a sticking point for any of the contracts that we try to bring to you, we need to try and get this updated, you guys can add that in there. So fence repairs. I notice when I end up giving this a cost, it's just going to be a flat cost deduction. So it's not going to be trying to depreciate the value or anything. So use this with some hesitancy, because if you do end up wanting to indicate to your client, look, this is going to take away from your value, put in a price that's going to be appropriate for that. So if you guys have somebody that can provide an estimate or whatever. A little further down, we have our refined value option for market or home conditions. That's going to be a little bit more subjective. What I would suggest doing is, if you guys do end up deciding to use this particular option, I would suggest making sure that you guys can see the number down here at the bottom. Maybe this local market is actually hopping, and we might want to increase the value of the property, but only by a certain amount. We can use this subjective slider to add in what we think is appropriate. So maybe I was looking for $15,000 extra, and slide this all the way to the top. That's pretty close. The exterior of the house is way better than most of the stuff in the area because of the remodel. Same thing goes with the interior. It's just excessively better than what else is in the area. I don't know this for sure, by the way. I'm not trying to disparage the neighborhood. I'm going to increase these a couple. So by the time we get done kind of giving the rundown on, like, well, the view is great, the lot size, so on and so forth, we can increase or decrease the value based on that. So I hit reset on this, and well, just like half the properties in Oklahoma, there's a Dollar Tree nearby, but this one's actually right behind the house. Property is going to be really low privacy, really low view, whatever the case may be. So you can adjust those to kind of set proper expectations for the client. But you'll notice that this gives a pretty specific dollar value for each of those. Again, it's all based on the market, so you may want to play with this or not based on how well you can explain what you've done. It's a little bit more art than it is science. All right, but let's say that we do end up wanting to go with a little bit more exact value method. I'm going to go back to our summary option. One of the buttons that's always going to be present, regardless of whether or not there's actually an estimated value that it's provided, is going to be the Create CMA option. The Create CMA option is actually going to function pretty much the exact same way that you would expect the CMAs to work in other systems. So what we're going to see here is I've got a comparative analysis or a sales comparison analysis. The comparative analysis is going to be pretty much the exact same thing that we teach in our CMAs and matrix class, where we go through, we find out the details about the house, we find an area that we're going to be searching within, we narrow that range, we narrow the time frame, and we only choose specific categories of, or specific status categories, in order for us to find just properties that are truly comparable and also relevant to the market. The sales comparison analysis is going to be a lot more in-depth. There's a quick and easy video that you guys can watch if you needed to learn the differences between the two. So if you guys are wanting to find out, what exactly the difference is and whether or not that sales comparison analysis is right for you, you might want to watch that video, because the comparison analysis is significantly more nuanced. You guys can go through and manually add in or deduct values based on your own experience or appraisal experience or an appraiser's opinion, whatever the case may be. So it's a lot more in depth. Getting a notice that my headset is not charged, and I don't know how that's possible, but bear with me for just a second here.
All right. Just to double check, can you guys hear me all right? I'm sorry for the sudden change. The USB cable that was charging my headset was not plugged in properly, so my mistake. Thank you guys for working with me on this. All right, so let's dive into the CMAs option. So when we're looking at the CMA side of things, the first thing that we're going to have to do is make sure that all of the facts that we have about the home are correct. So the same thing that we saw earlier, we need to make sure that the bedroom count, bathroom count, everything that we have is the correct information for this. So first and foremost, it's going to prefer the public remarks. If it has the option to pull from a recent listing, or in this case, an active listing, it's going to grab that data. But you always have the option to go through and manually add that detail in case you guys do end up having some difference in how large, small the house is, or what the bedroom, bathroom count is, whatever the case may be. Now, once you have appropriately adjusted all of these, at the very bottom, click on that Confirm Facts and Close. Now, the next step is to find our comps. Now, finding the comparables is going to function pretty much the exact same way that we do in Matrix, except it's just a little bit different as far as how things are laid out. So we have our property type over here. It automatically chose what the property type is for this particular property. So it has single family residence. We have the property status showing us active for sale, pending, closed. NAR also recommends if you guys do end up in a situation where maybe the properties in the vicinity aren't selling because there's some overpricing or underpricing, usually not going to have too many people miss out on an opportunity for a deal, but we can always include the expired listings as well. So if we have something in the area that maybe the listing agreement got to the end without actually selling, you can have that expired listing be displayed. This is often more helpful if you have a client that's trying to overvalue their property. You can show them those expired listings and say, look, if we do end up pricing it for that value, there's a likelihood that we may end up making it to the end of your listing agreement without it selling. So expireds could be good information. You can kind of use that the same way that you use the vowels A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y. The off-market date, I would recommend that you guys keep it within the last 6 months, if at all possible. For those of you guys who are working in a little bit more rural areas, you may want to expand this out to 12 months, but there's never a better example of how wild the market can be than the last couple of years here. So strongly recommended that you guys don't go over the 12 months. We do give you the option to if need be. So if you guys are working with vacant land out in the middle of nowhere, you got something that's 15 miles from Broken Bow down in the southern corner of the state, we might want to go back a little further because maybe there's not really anything selling and the market also doesn't fluctuate quite as much. So set that appropriately. Again, we still recommend the 6 months as the best option. Now the size, it automatically has a minimum option set, but notice it only has a maximum option so that it's giving us a distinctive range for the living size. This way, if there is something that has way more bathrooms, we don't have to worry about that if everything else in the property is the same. It does give us the option to do a price range. I wouldn't necessarily recommend adding that in there, but if you do find yourself getting some listings added on there that maybe are just from a completely different subdivision or just radically different than the property that you're searching for, you can check that checkbox to make sure you kind of weed out any of the properties that are just a different build, a different property. You got a mobile home that somebody has expanded on a dozen times. Now it's got the same specifications as the house across the street. It could be problematic for your comps. There's also finally an option to add keywords. You can only do up to 6. But once you guys have set your specifications, the search will actually be completed in the area that it shows over here to the right. And I mean that literally. So if I zoom in, it's only going to take all of the properties within the confines of this rectangle. So if you do end up having trouble finding some comps, you may just want to simply zoom out. Now suddenly you've got access to a whole bunch of different properties that are a little bit further outside of that. If you zoom in, again, this is going to make sure that we're only seeing the properties that are in the immediate vicinity. Furthermore, if you guys want to maybe assign a specific area, you can draw shapes, either boxes, radiuses, or polygons. Radii? Anyway, you can also build custom areas. So for instance, if you do end up having a subdivision that you wanted to define, or maybe a subdivision you work in often, you can draw that shape and then add that to this list. But in my case, I'm just going to leave it with the page itself, or with the rectangle, excuse me. And I found some comparable properties. And just to reiterate one more time, the area that we define is based on the size of the map that we're viewing. If I zoom out, you can see that I don't have anything from outside that area. It's still just confined to this rectangle where I was zoomed before. Now, when I've run my search, I can go back and modify this further, but I've actually already got my results showing up down here at the bottom. So interestingly enough, we've got the sale from earlier of this same exact property. Oh, no, that's a different property. My bad. It looks like they did the exact same changes to it. Interesting. Anyway, you'll notice that any of the properties that it found that are comparable, that it may have used to give you guys the price estimate, are actually going to be labeled as used in RVM. Similarly, if this was used in the AVM, it'll be doing the exact same thing. But what happens is that this is actually a property that was already being used to give that price estimate that we saw before. Same thing with this one right here. Looks like we found one that wasn't quite as similar, at least according to the system, but maybe I want to include that. There might be a reason why this particular property is worth more or less, probably that square footage, I'm betting. So when we find something that we think is comparable, we can check the checkboxes for it. We don't have to choose all of them at once. So for instance, if I was pretty happy with this one not being included in the price estimate, I'm probably not going to do the same thing. This one though, looks like it's really only just a little bit smaller. The value is pretty high though, so that might be a good way to indicate that, well, this is going to sell for $250,000, but we have more space, more bedrooms, more bathrooms, and so on. So once you're done with checking all of the listings that you're interested in, up down here at the very bottom, we've got an update valuation and close. There's also another one at the bottom of this list. If you guys do end up finding that you don't like this checkbox thing, you check your checkboxes, you can always review on the list here, scrolling up and down, and you can get rid of anything that you don't think is appropriate right here. There we go. So I can do update valuation and close, and I'm all set. Now what it's going to do is it's going to grab all of those comps and give us the range. Down here at the bottom, we have our result of the comp analysis. This is where we want to make sure that we have the kind of massaging of the information here. So in my case, I'm going to click on edit. I'm going to keep this as kind of my baseline. So I'm going to say 225, and we'll have a minimum that's, I'm going to close up this range because that's way too big. We'll do 200 to 250. Save. So shaved off some on the bottom, shaved some off the top, and I'm all set. Now, once we've done this, it presents us with the opportunity to create a report. Now, we haven't talked too much about the reports so far, but even when you first land on a particular listing, we can hit a create a report button. And what this is going to do is it's actually going to take all of the property details and start us off with a pre-built report that you guys can put together that's just called a property report. It's around 20 to 30 pages, and it's going to show a lot of details to the client. Again, only the publicly accessible information, not any of the MLS specific information, but it'll put all of that into a handy report for them. Now, if we do end up putting something else together, like we got the sales comparison analysis or the comparative analysis, whenever we're looking at those pages, so like if I'm on, I need to find out why it's doing this sending request to Facebook thing. When we're on the CMA page, once we've run through the full CMA option and I click on report, instead of it being the property report, it's going to start me off with this seller's report. Similarly, if I did that sales comparison analysis, which again was the significantly more in-depth option, it'll provide us with a valuation workbook. So there's a variety of different reports that we have access to. All of these reports are actually available on your phone as well. So interestingly enough, if you guys are out and about, and again, you guys see that house across the street, you want to create a report, you can still do that from your phone. It's going to be the exact same reports that you're creating, whether you do it on your computer or on your phone. So let's take a look at what this seller's report is going to include. Over on the right-hand side, we can see view sample for each of the reports that are available. It's going to give you guys just kind of a generic view. They update these whenever they update the reports themselves. But there's a lot of cool things that they build into it. I'm going to actually create one of these reports so we can see what it looks like. But instead of using that view sample option, if I want to see all of the sections and pages that it's going to include, I can click on this little plus arrow or plus icon to the right. Now under this, I can see that there's a couple things that I've actually gotten rid of. So for instance, I got rid of this estimated value change. I don't want to include the refined value because maybe it's like really far off. There's a couple things on here that I'm not fond of just because it artificially bloats the reports a little bit. For instance, the market activity. This is going to show what's happening in the area, but it might not always necessarily be beneficial information for my seller to know this. So I might just not include that just to make sure that I'm not seeing anything that's not relevant to my client. A little further down, I'm going to take away this refined value calculation and just leave the comp analysis. We also have the option to suppress refined value. This was the option I was trying to find yesterday. We have the option to suppress the estimated value for my property that I'm looking at for this particular seller or buyer if I'm trying to create a CMA for the buyer. And then we also have the suppress refined value as well. So if you guys don't want to have that computer generated valuation, the RVM, show up, even if I've made my changes to try and align it with my CMA that I've created, you can always get rid of those so that you're only seeing information that you yourself have produced. But after I've chosen to include or not include any of the parts and pieces of that report, down at the very bottom, we can either put in some details and then email this out to a client, or we have the option just to create that PDF and just immediately view it. Now, the reports do take a little bit of time for it to show, a minute or two at most. So I'm going to hit this run report option. It's going to tell me that I've got this seller's report generating, and it's going to show me that up at the top of my screen, there's going to be a little notification number. Now this box will automatically close, so you can close it out if you want to, or you can just have it automatically disappear. And up at the top, I've got my reports icon. So just like you guys have those notifications on your phone, click on it, and it'll show you what's happening. You can also see any of the reports that you've created that day. Those will appear on the specific report options. So for instance, my seller's report that I'm creating is showing up here. I can click on each of those if need be and create a report for a particular property or particular area. You can also change the address if you needed to maybe switch this out to a different property. So I'm going to navigate back to my homepage. Whenever we do end up creating a report, which I'm going to get a notification about in just a minute here, I can always circle back to see any of those reports right here as well. So if I've created a report that I needed to quickly grab, like I made one yesterday for something in Bixby, another one for something in Tahlequah, I can jump back into either of those reports and it'll open that PDF back up for me. Now back on my RPR page. I'll wait just another minute here. It should give me the seller's report in a moment. I just want to be here for the ding. There's a little doorbell sound that'll chime whenever the report has been finalized. If I'm not mistaken, shouldn't have this tab muted. There it goes. Okay, this time we actually heard it. Yesterday, for some reason, it didn't sound. So the report has been successfully generated. Now, it doesn't give as much fanfare whenever you finalize the report on the phone, but if you guys want to, you can always create the reports on your phone and email them or open them up directly on your phone. So if there was some information that you guys wanted to share with the client immediately, you can do that. And as you guys saw, it just took a couple minutes for it to create this report. When I click download report, I've got a 29-page PDF that's going to show me all the details that I wanted to for this particular property. Here's what the list price was, the comp analysis that I created. We can see all the basic facts about the property. And a little further on, it's going to have some details about the area. We've got some details about the listing price versus selling price in this area, what it's been, how frequently it's being updated. So there's a lot of really valuable information for the sellers if they ever need this kind of stuff. But again, you also have the option to choose whether or not to include certain portions of it. So like this is going to be good information, getting to see my comps and so on. But maybe they don't need to know what the median sales price by square foot is. So, I mean, this might be good, or maybe they just don't care. So again, curate those reports based on what your client's needs are. All right. So let's jump back. Let's take a look at a different report. So I'm going to scroll down. We're going to just grab one of these properties here in Tulsa. Well, not that one. Let's do, oh, wow, on the other side, literally almost 10 times more expensive. Sure, let's go ahead and open this one. So what I'm looking at here, I've got this beautiful property. We can scroll through all the photos like normal, but I'm going to click on this create a report option. So again, we have our property report. I can expand that out, see what parts and pieces are available for it. I've also got a mini property report. This is a little bit shorter. This is going to be a lot more focused on just the property itself, especially if you guys have buyers that really don't need all of the information that you have available to you on this particular property. You can just click on that mini property report and it'll produce something that's pretty nice. There's also this property flyer option. So for instance, if I'm just suddenly going to have to go do a open house for this particular property and I wanted to create some flyer for what I'm going to be discussing, I can create a property flyer, print off a dozen of these or something, and I just have to put in a headline, grab whichever photo it is that I want to use, and then we can even change out the, this is being pulled over directly from the public remarks. We can change this out and add in any of the different information that we need. Huh. That's not good. Whenever this listing came over, looks like it accidentally added in some accented letters instead of the apostrophe. I have to report that. That's okay. All right. So that's about it for our reports. Let's take a look at a couple of the other options that we have in here. If you do end up needing to work with a property that is off market, you do have the ability to search for those. So everything that we've been doing so far was from the perspective of trying to find a listing or a property that was already on the market. If I switch this over from for sale to public records, we can narrow our search even further by trying to find things that have sold recently, or if we wanted to, we can find the property that I've got a seller that's working with me. Riverside Drive, no, not California. There we go. So here's a property that I had previously visited. You can see that I have it saved, and I even saved it with a specific name. But I needed to go through and maybe create a comp analysis for this, or maybe refine the value just a little bit from the estimate that it provided. So all of this can be done for any of those properties that are off market, just like they can for things that are on market. So if you ever need to go back and make changes to a particular property that you're working with or that you're going to be working with, again, you can fill out all those changes. You can add in any notes about the property. And then whenever you create your reports for it, it'll be able to include those in the reports or not. So this is a great way to introduce people to the value that you have as a realtor, because you can be talking to them during your listing presentation and go ahead and create maybe a seller's proceeds, or maybe get a report sent to them that has all of the details that they didn't even know about their property in the matter of minutes. So this can be an incredibly valuable tool for you guys, even when you're working with those sellers as well. All right, let me make sure that we covered everything in the app. Excellent. Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure. I'm going to close all these other tabs. So now let's talk about how we get the support. So if you guys do end up enjoying RPR, you want to learn more about it, up here at the top, we've got a learn option. The learn option is actually going to be contextual. What that means is that whenever you guys open up a specific page in RPR, it's going to present you with some curated articles or video tutorials or questions that are going to be based on this particular page that you happen to be on. So for instance, when I'm on the property summary, I can see they've got a property details video that allows you guys to kind of run through some of the same stuff we've already discussed. There's also a button here for pricing a property, because again, it's relating to these options that you guys have down here. If I switch over instead to this CMA button, whenever I go over to the learn option now, it's going to be focused more on the pricing for the property. We've got a pricing the property video still being presented, but our top questions have changed. If I head back to my home page, let's say you guys get back, you're finally registered and signed in to RPR. You click on the learn page up here. You can learn about my markets. You can learn about explore your home page. There's even the recent edition of that AARP livability index. If you guys aren't familiar with that, or in my case, I hadn't even heard of it before, you guys can click on this video and learn more about it. There's also some video tutorials found under the help option. There's a search that allows you guys to search their knowledge base immediately. So even without having to leave the RPR website, we can find out more about any of the questions that we may have. There's additionally going to be a phone number that's available 24/7. So even though we do have a lot of people here on the help desk that are extremely familiar with RPR, and honestly, we all kind of like it, you guys can always reach out to an actual expert no matter what time of day it is. They also recently added in the live chat function. I've actually switched over to just using the live chat simply because I don't know, I've just gotten used to typing messages out to people since we've been, trying to stay in quarantine more. So this is a pretty valuable tool, in my opinion. If you guys just have a quick question you want to ask, rather than having to go through all the prompts and wait for somebody to answer and then have to explain your issue, you can just type it all out and get your answer really quick without having to say goodbye. Not really. I always stay cordial, but we do have the option to send you guys over to the training area as well. And there's even an email option for those of you guys who just don't really need to answer immediately. You guys can send that off. They'll typically respond pretty promptly anyway. But in the training area, they have a wealth of information. This is where you guys can find all sorts of different details about RPR, either from the perspective of the commercial side, the residential side, how to use it on the computer. Like they've got a RPR for new members webinar that you guys can watch. If you do end up finding that you want to learn more about a specific function in RPR, this is usually where I'm going to learn more about stuff. There's also an RPR mobile webinar, and there's also an RPR mobile video. I think they still have. Yeah, here we go. So it's a little quick tutorial. Strongly recommended that you guys learn about the mobile side of things. When we used to offer this as a 3-hour-long CE credit class, that was one of my favorite things to cover. We covered it during the last hour of the class, but unfortunately that got trimmed due to, honestly, I just don't think a 3-hour-long webinar is a particularly good idea. I think people's attention spans are kind of locked in at about 2 hours. Look, if you can't pay attention for all of Rush Hour, the movie, I don't know that 3 hours is going to help out, Anyway, so if you guys need to do any additional learning, or you guys want to familiarize yourself with the product even more, this is a great place to start. So I'm going to leave the session open for a couple more minutes if you guys have any questions, but the biggest recommendation that I can give you guys, no matter what level of experience you guys have with RPR, or if you guys are interested in learning more about it, is just get in there and play with it. Especially once you guys have registered and signed in for the first time, which is a very simple process. All you need to do is just your first and last name, or excuse me, not even your first and last name. It's literally just your last name that you have registered with RPR or with NAR. Come on, Mike. Last name that you have registered with NAR, and then whatever the email address is that you have with NAR. You can also use your NERDS ID, which is the National Realtor Database System. If you guys don't have that ID, or you're not familiar with what email it is that you have registered with NAR, you can always get in contact with us at the service desk or our membership team. We always have to keep those NERDS IDs on file in order to validate that you're a legitimate realtor. So we have that information. We can give it to you if you need it. But once you guys are registered and signed in, get signed in on your app on the phone, because I really think that it's actually the most valuable app that you guys have access to. And I'm not saying that out of some duty or some hyperbole. This is a legitimate recommendation that this is the first thing that you guys should be downloading after class is over. But that's about it for today's class. Again, I'll leave the session running for a little bit if you guys have any questions immediately, but I think that should be everything that we needed to cover today. Yeah, thank you guys so much for joining us. And in the interim, I'm hoping we'll be able to get back to in-person classes, but just keep wearing your masks, make sure that you guys are social distancing, and hopefully the numbers will start dropping and we can safely meet in person again. But I appreciate you guys transitioning to the webinar, even though this isn't quite as personal as the in-person stuff can be. I miss it. I really like teaching in person. But anyway. Oh, and the app will be in your app store. Oh, and Kristen, you can leave if you would like. Yeah, the class is officially over now. But Gilda, it's the, oh, what? That's weird. The timestamp on your question says 3:30. Anyway, the app, you can just go to either your app store, or if you're on an Android device, it might be the Google Play Store. But if you just do a search for RPR, it should be one of the first options. It'll actually be the same logo that we see down here at the bottom. A little bit different. It's a little blue icon, but it's still that same 3 connected dots with a spare dot that's not connected.